Welcome, greetings, and welcome. This is Miracles with a Twist. I'm Lori Cardona. I'm here with Linda Pazos. Hi, Linda.
Hi, Lori.
Miracles with a Twist has a dedication to looking at A Course in Miracles from an interfaith, sometimes multicultural perspective. Our desire has been to take the course material from being heady to bringing it hearty into our hearts. The reason being, the reason that's so important is because you can read A Course in Miracles, you can go to groups and discuss A Course in Miracles, you can discuss the concepts, but that's where it's heading. The idea of bringing it into our hearts, making it hearty, is when we start to live it, when we begin to integrate the principles and the ideas, because we see it as a mystic's path. And a mystic's path is one where we do walk the talk, not just occasionally, but always. It's our desire to live according to our true mystical, spiritual principles, practices, wanting to do that, rise higher, love steadily, forgive readily. And the reason Linda and I got once again into a series of discussions is because I saw a video with Joe Dispenza where he said science is the new mysticism. And I know that Linda has been to some Joe Dispenza retreats and she reads his books and she understands him maybe more than I do. And so I said, why don't you help me understand how it is that science is the new mysticism? And I actually agree with the idea, because yogis have known that we have this ability to rise within ourselves, to connect with something that is higher and holier than our ego self. But now science is showing us what's actually going on in our bodies and in our brains and in our nervous systems. And so while we know that we're trying to get away from the ego's whisper to tell us to judge and to be in our reactivity, our spiritual self is saying, no, we need to take a higher holy self. And yet we also know that in order to have those disciplines that take us even higher to a mystical experience, it's now, thanks to Joe Dispenza and other quantum physicists, it's now within our knowledge base to understand what's actually going on in our bodies, in our minds, and in our nervous system. So, Linda, I'm going to toss it to you. Hello and welcome back. We've missed you here at Miracles with a Twist.
Hi, Lori. I've missed you guys too. And like you said, we always get into these deep conversations about something that comes to one of us in our hearts and minds. And then we say, okay, let's talk about that in a podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's
So
do it.
thank you. Thank you. I do want to say, yes, I've been to a number of Joe Dispenza's retreats. I love them. And I've read a number of his books. And what we're going to speak about today is going to be my interpretation. By no means am I saying this is exactly what Joe is saying. It's my interpretation of his teachings, and hopefully we'll be able to broaden our audience's understanding of what his work is. So I just wanted to put that out there first.
Great. So you'll give us an idea of how you interpret or understand mysticism.
Exactly. So, if you were to look up what is the mystical or mysticism in the dictionary, we'd see something about a spiritual meaning or a reality that is neither apparent to the senses nor obvious to the intelligence, because it's beyond the world that we know as 3D. And some spiritual leaders may refer to this as like a communion with a God or a universe. Like you mentioned, it's a deep connection with something that we call our higher holy selves. A mystic is like a person who claims to be able to attain those beliefs in the possibility of attaining insight into the mysteries, and so transcending the ordinary human knowledge. Um, and they do that through direct communication with the divine or in immediate intuitive senses in a state of what they call spiritual ecstasy.
Mm. Yeah, and in A Course in Miracles, we call that a holy instant. It's that moment where we're suspended in time and space, or from time and space. We're completely uh, disassociated from our egos and connected with the higher holy self, the divine, and or divine source. So lots of different ways to say the same thing. And I think that
We're
once you
being
have that experience, you know what that is. It's almost unnameable. You know, it's there's just so many things that we just don't have the right words for, but it is an experience. So in A Course in Miracles, they call it a holy instant. And it may only last an instant. And in that instant, we have a shift. There's a shift. Now, a miracle in Course in Miracles is considered something that is possible in the 3D world, where what you're referring to, the 3D world. But this higher holy experience is a direct experience, and that's why it feels ecstatic in that moment, because it's like, wow, how can I feel so connected? It's so beyond this madness, right? There's a course teacher that used to say that the world we live in is the psychiatric unit of the universe, because there is so much madness. There's so much stuff we don't understand in terms of, you know, unkindness, cruelty, politics, social unrest, so many things that happen that are just right here in this 3D world. And to be able to take a step back and look at it from a higher perspective is a way to find peace somehow, you know, the peace that surpasses understanding, which is an expression. But we want to have this connection more than just on occasion, right? And so what you're saying is that the mystic is connecting and finding that connection and recognizing that as being more real than the 3D world. Because ultimately we're not going to be in these bodies and in this space. So we're finding more and more that there's an actual scientific explanation for what goes on when we're having those mystical experiences. And I guess that's where Joe tells us that science is the new mysticism.
Jill actually tells us, that we are the creators of our own destiny. And in order to create that destiny, the destiny is unknown, but in order to create in the unknown, one must become like a mystic and be mystical and transcend ordinary human knowledge. In the realm of mysticism, for example, there's no separation. I mean, I can get out of my seat here and go to my French doors to go in my yard, and that's what he considers separation. It's matter. I'm matter here in the 3D. And when I go to those doors, I'm separating because I've allowed time and space and I'm going to the doors. But in the mystical world, there is nothing physical, nothing material. There's no matter because it's all energy. And we, as human beings in this human experience, don't realize how powerful we really are. And, you ask yourself, can you transform your life through becoming mystical by transcending beyond your own senses in the 3D world?
Mm-hmm. I'm smiling because the entire workbook of A Course in Miracles, there's a text section, and then it follows the text is a workbook. And the whole workbook is about deconstructing our ego's concepts of everything. And the first 10 lessons are all about how I don't really know what this is. I've given it a name, but I don't know what it is, and I've given it meaning. And some people, they start the workbook and they there's this joke about how, you throw your book against the wall and then pick it up 16 years later, because it's a difficult concept to conceptualize and to be able to really integrate that understanding that we've given everything our own meaning, not an ultimate meaning, but we relate to, like you said, walking to the door. It's the door. I decide it's the door. And it's hard to get beyond the concept of, what is, brick and mortar,
Yeah.
because from a mystic's path, it's like that's just temporary. That's just a temporary illusion. And if we want to walk a mystic's path, we have to move toward this concept of non-duality, and that we're sharing things, we're sharing thoughts. There is an idea in the course that says, I have no neutral thoughts, I have no private thoughts. Everything is shared, everything is part of the cosmos, this non-dual space that we live in our soul space, not in our physical space. So it's difficult to understand if you're just stuck in your head around how things are or how they should be. And that's why we want to move into our hearts and into the mystical experience, because ultimately matter doesn't matter, and so as we
It's
attain
true.
spiritual mastery, we see all of those things as temporary, and as the Buddhists would say, something we don't become attached to. But
Yeah.
there's the new science is quantum physics, which I always say quantum physicists are like sacred scientists, because they're really helping us look at things in the way that we as ego attached humans, we need that heady understanding. We need that movement into something that we can say, okay, I get it now. That's one way of getting it. The other way of getting it is to have those holy instance in those mystical experiences.
Yeah. Really. You know, if we go back to science, the science, as you're saying, it might help people to understand because, like you're saying, we're here in this world, and this is what we see, this is what we smell, this is what we feel, this is, it's real, it's matter. But if you go back to science, and I'm going to go back to Einstein,
Oh,
he said that the field, energy, so synonymous with the field is energy, is the sole governing agency of the particle, which is matter. So, energy, field, matter, particle. If you break things down, take a table, break anything down into its smallest particle, it's an atom. It's invisible, but it's still energy. And if you can change the information in the field, the energy, you should be able to affect the particle, which is matter. So, is there a way to create from the field instead of from matter?
mm,
Can we create from that energy, which encompasses all of us, instead of from me getting up and walking to that door? Matter. It sounds confusing, but trust me, there are people that go through walls.
yeah.
Scary, but it happens. So the closest, we get to source, to divinity, to God, whatever you want to call it, the better we can create an infinite number of possibilities. And everything imaginable exists in the field of energy, unless there's less separation in the 3D. If so I'm going to tell the audience, listen, if you are my students, might be a little confused now. So this is what I want you to remember. I would tell you to take notes on three things. Keep the thoughts about the mystic beyond human knowledge, what you experience in your five senses right now. Okay, so keep that thought. It's one note. Energy and matter. Second note, they're interchangeable, because if you can affect energy in the, if you can affect the field, the energy, then you're going to affect matter. So they're interchangeable. And destiny, the unknown. Once you affect those things, you affect your destiny, which is unknown. So,
first I want to say,
explanation, I hope.
listen, first I wanted to look something up real quick while you're talking, and I'm sorry I have to do this. Hopefully it'll come quickly. I happen to love Einstein. I mean, I do believe he was somewhat of a mystic himself. And when he was asked often about his spiritual belief system, and he said, "I believe in the God of Spinoza." And the God of Spinoza, I mean, it's a wonderful essay. I'm not going to read the whole thing now, but the God of Spinoza is a God of non-judgment, a God who says, don't beat yourself up. I never wanted you to feel bad about yourself. I created everything that exists in you, even your judgments, even your hardships, even the goodness that you can attain. That's what Einstein believed in. So he was a bit of a mystic himself, because he believed that the God of Spinoza was the God that saw us as perfect and divine, and with that ability to rise higher and to rise to these places that all the mystics' paths have told us about. So anyway, thank you for bringing up Einstein. There's two other things that came up when you were speaking. One was the concept of the atom, the particles, the atom. Now, you know, in the Judeo-Christian traditions, both traditions start with the idea of Adam and Eve. But on the mystics' perspective, and I believe it was first introduced by Kabbalah, it's atom, not Adam, atom. We are all atoms of one unified self. Mm-hmm. That's profound when you think of it that way. If we can actually live from that concept and live from that idea, then we would not see separation. We'd say, oh, you're a part of me, because your particles and my particles create a greater humanship, sonship, daughtership, loveship together on a higher plane, a higher holy plane. That those particles are atom, not atom. The other thing that came to mind, you were talking about the field, and I think of it as the quantum field. I used to do a workshop called Quantum Forgiveness, and people were, what's that? How's that different from regular forgiveness? And it's because that level of forgiveness that we can't even imagine. If I'm telling you a story about something that somebody said to me and they were mean and they said this and blah, blah, and we might join together in our upset or in our judgment. And yet,
do.
Yeah, we do. Just did. And our quantum forgiveness is a place in a field where we can release that. We can release those places where we get stuck in our ego's judgment and condemnation. And it's beyond our human logic. Rumi said, let's see, I have it written down here. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to even talk about. So I see that quantum field, that place you're referring to, is a place beyond our physical eyes and even beyond our physical heart. It's someplace that we would love to attain. I saw this picture once in a book by Ram Dass, and I think it was his Be Here Now book. Like, he wrote it like in the 60s, and he has these pages where there's scribble, basically, sketches. And there's this one where he did this sketch of Jesus laying on the ground with his arm out, and he's looking over his arm at the guy who's strapping his, who's tying his arm down and putting the nail in his hand. But he has eyes of compassion. And he's looking at, Ram Dass is back in his 60s. He's probably thinking, oh man, I feel sorry for that dude and his job. Like, instead of being upset and angry and how dare you do this to me, he was like, oh man, I wouldn't want to have to do that to somebody. I wouldn't want to have to hurt somebody, because those are eyes of the mystic, the eyes that can see beyond the ego, beyond even physical pain. And it's just, it reminds me of that story. I think it was 2015, where there was a young man in a Bible study who went into that church in Charleston, and he killed 12 people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there was an interview with Koda Hoppy on Channel 4. It was a story about forgiveness. And there was a few women, one who'd lost her son, one who'd lost her husband. And they were speaking of the experience of being in there. And I talk about them every time I do a quantum forgiveness workshop, because they spoke about this light that they saw in the room. This one woman, she was talking about, there was a light from the rifle as it was shooting, those lights that you see. She said, but there was a greater light. There was a greater light in that room. And I knew that was the light of the higher Holy Spirit. And as she was holding her son as he was dying, she knew that his soul had a greater purpose. And I know, she was able to connect with that. She was able to. I remember when the news came out and the medical examiner was talking about them and was talking about the people and all the deaths. And she said, but I have to say, I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen anything like these people, because they walked in with love. They walked in with forgiveness. And I said, that's the quantum field. That's not the human field. That's a place where there's got to be some understanding of non-duality, of higher holy self, of a bigger picture that we can ever see in a snapshot of moments of our lives.
Yeah. Well, she saw herself in the field of oneness that you were just speaking about. She literally saw herself in that moment in that field of oneness, where every possibility is in that field. There's an infinite number of possibilities: the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful. It's beyond human intelligence.
Yes.
She didn't see herself as separate from the shooter. She saw herself one.
Right. She did not. And she talked about the process of getting there, because of course, there's the shock and the upset, and then where she had her human experience, of course they had their grief. This isn't denying whatever grief you might be feeling, but to be able to see that bigger picture, the soul level of connection, and maybe even what we were ultimately designed for, because we never know how we're going to leave this earth, but we know we're going to leave it. And so they understood that there was a reason why it happened, and maybe they couldn't ever understand it intellectually, but they were accepting it. And so they went through this process where acceptance became the impetus, the motivation for forgiveness, to allow their hearts to have that connection and that forgiveness. I don't know whatever happened to the shooter. I don't know what happened to him, but there was this, every day I send out a WhatsApp text for the WhatsApp to Miracles with the Twist group. And the one I sent out yesterday that said, evolution is a process in which you seem to proceed from one degree to the next. And that's in the text, chapter 2, very early on. And I always say that it's like, Earth is like, we're in school, and we're trying to get this higher degree, and it's an evolutionary process of our soul. And we make choices, you never know. You and I both have higher degrees. When we went in for our classes, we didn't know. We just knew what we wanted. We knew what degree we wanted to leave school with, university. You wanted to leave university with your degree, but you didn't know what you had to go through to get there. Same thing with Earth life. We don't know what we're going to have to go through. So even if it's tragic and horrible, that's the place where we have to move into the quantum field.
Yeah.
And say, this is part of my evolution. This is my soul's alchemy. And so we go into acceptance and forgiveness.
And we're talking about it as if it's so easy, but it is not. It is so hard, because we're human beings,
right,
having a human experience
Yes,
and fail to recognize we have the capacity to get beyond that.
we do.
Think about that ability. If you closed your eyes and just see blackness, there's no thing, there's no one, there's no place, there's no time, there's no space. It is in this place, that field of energy, that woman was able to see herself as one with the shooter. It's
Yes,
hard. Oh my God, it's so, so hard.
her
But
deeper
we have the
understanding.
ability to do so.
We do have the ability, and the ability has to come from willingness, because we have the capacity, but do we have the willingness? Because
Exactly.
sometimes we want to get stuck in the story. She could have just gotten stuck in her story. But I remember her saying toward the end of the interview, if I don't forgive, I don't heal. So it's not really something we're doing for someone else in the end, in our soul, when it comes to a soul level. Because people say, well, if you forgive, you're condoning that behavior. No, no, no. We're not condoning behavior. We're allowing our souls to move into a place of unimaginable, just not understandable peace. Because it's like, how do we get there? All we have to do is we understand that it is within us, and we have to have the willingness to do the work to get there. And sometimes that work means coming back into the place where you first started, when you first started talking about, going into meditation, going into these retreats, going into a place within, or what you just said about closing your eyes. You see the darkness, you see where you're nowhere and you're actually nothing. You're nowhere and you're no one. You are only one. There's this song I heard recently. Brandon Heath does a lot of inspirational music, but it's also, he does a duet with Jelly Roll, and I don't know if anybody knows him, but he's like, he's like all tattooed, he looks thuggish, but he sings this duet with this guy. It's called Hard Fought Hallelujah. I'm gonna read it. Got it on my phone. Just this one part. It says, "There are days when praise comes out easy, and days when it takes all the strength I've got. I'll bring my hard fought, heartfelt, been through hell, hallelujah. And I'll bring my storm tossed, torn sail, story to tell, hallelujah, hallelujah. Because whatever I'm feeling or facing, I can bring my heart fought, heartfelt, it is well, hallelujah." So there's a progression there. There's the first part where it's like, oh, I'm going through hell. And there's the other part where it says, all is well. All is well. And that's the soul level of acceptance, forgiveness, understanding, when we can get to that place.
Well, in the quantum field, if you take away everything in the universe that could be separate, you take away everything physical, earth, planets, moon, sun, until you're left with nothing. That nothing is full of the energy and frequency in which we vibrate at every single day. That is the field and is achievable through things like meditation and breathing techniques. You close the gap because there is no time and space. I recently did a breathwork session with a friend of ours, a dear friend of ours, Veronica.
Yeah.
And it's called, let me see if I can remember it. It's in Spanish, respiración. Okay, so you go from spirit to energy to peace to love.
Mm.
So I was laying on the floor on a blanket and stuff. I had something under my head, I had something under my knees, and she began this breath with me to practice. And it's a strong intake and it's a soft exhale, but there's no break between the inhale and the exhale. So it's a and it goes on for a long time. So, to help our viewers understand what we're trying to say, I'll explain a little bit about my experience with that.
Sure.
Because it's like I was conscious, but not conscious. It's like I was in between two realities. What happened to myself during this breathing breath work, my entire body, it started with my fingers, and it was started with a small tingle. And then before I know it, it was more than a tingle. And this was going through my entire body. I felt like it was lining like a Kundalini snake going through your chakras.
Yeah.
And before I knew it, I was holding on to myself. And when we're done, she tells me what she observed because sometimes I'm not aware of my behavior when I'm in it. And so I was holding on because my thought was fear.
Oh,
I felt a feeling of fear as my body was experiencing this vibrational energy going throughout me. And I kept surrendering, saying, don't leave me, because I did not want it to end. I wanted to experience it.
yes.
I wanted to surrender completely to whatever this was.
Mm.
I wasn't scared. I knew Veronica was watching me.
Right.
And if anything
Yeah.
happened, she'd take me out of it. And what actually happened, I felt like I was tumbling. Then I had all of this energy and I felt like I was tumbling. So what Veronica told me when we were done was, you weren't tumbling. Your body was literally shifting from left to right, from left to right.
Mm.
And I remember it as I was tumbling. So I can't describe what that was, but it wasn't of this realm.
Yeah. It's I, it goes back to what you were saying before. We have to have those experiences through meditation, through, you're not going to have that experience just walking down the street going, oh, I'd like to have those tingles. It's
Dilla
not,
diddy diddy.
it's something that, those holy instants that I talked about. And there in Hinduism, they talk about Shaktipat, when it's, you have this amazing bliss when you're in touch with the divine, and it's accessible through breath work. It's accessible through deep meditation. And the interesting thing is that when you said, I don't want it to leave me, I want to continue. Imagine if you could. I mean, imagine if we could live with that level of ecstatic connection, with.
It was real intense. I don't know if I could live through that, but it was intense. It was intense.
It was intense. Yeah. Well, they say that's why some people have like a rapid decline. Like once they've reached that level, it continues getting like a little more hokey. Maybe we have to have another discussion about this. But some people say, well, why did so and so die? Well, it's it seems as though the body can only take so much, and sometimes when we get into those ecstatic states, it's almost like some people want to stay there, and some people have left their bodies as a result of
So, you
having
know,
experience.
if we remember back to now, I didn't smoke anything, I didn't eat any mushrooms, I didn't do anything. But if you remember back to the psychedelic period, the Beatles and stuff, you
Yeah,
know, people would transcendental meditation. You remember those days? People were literally elevating, you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
themselves. So, you know, it was like I was experiencing pure consciousness, is what I would say. And I was no longer me, and I became one with Source. I was aware of me, but I wasn't aware of me. At the same, I was in between this duality of 3D and other dimensions.
Mhm.
And come on, we've known this power for centuries,
Right.
centuries. This isn't gobbledygook.
It's
We've
not.
known
Right.
this,
Right.
okay? These experiences are well researched. I mean, look at neuroplasticity with the brain and sources, epigenetics. Just
Yes.
think about those things. But the Egyptians with the power of the third eye, the Chinese with I Ching,
Yes.
and the CIA is fully aware that we have a consciousness. This exists within us, but it was all kind of like suppressed and has been apparent through the 20th century. It's become more and more of an understanding through the works of Ernest Holmes with quantum physics and so many others. I mean, when I read Joe's books, I have Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, for example, and his other book, Becoming Supernatural.
Mm.
We're bringing back, this is an era in the 20th century of bringing back this power that is within us to create the unknown, the destiny.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think also because we have access to the internet, into YouTube,
Yep.
we can listen to meditations that Joe leads people through, and we're not stuck in four walls. And for people who have pushed past the dogma of certain religions that felt that were constraining them, they now understand that there is something beyond those four walls. God was not contained in four walls. No spirit is contained beyond in four walls. And the earthbound religions have been teaching that forever. Native American, African American spirituality, the New Age movement in the 80s and 90s. When we were looking at Kundalini rising, and then Sufism, the Vedanta, Kabbalah, all these mystics paths that were once sort of secret mystery schools. And now we have access to all of them, and we can see what's available to us, not just for information, but for that rising, for that experience, and breath work. That's something that more and more people are looking to see how they themselves can control their breath, and what you experienced with Veronica. She's a great facilitator. So, wow, we're just, we're just so endless. We are absolutely endless, and it's not just about, you said we're humans having a human experience. Sometimes you say we're humans having a spiritual experience, spiritual having a human experience, whatever it is, it's beyond you and I, and yet it is you and I, and here we are moving up in terms of trying to see how high we can rise, and how long we can stay there in that higher holy self, in that connection.
And now there's the science um, that we can explain it. We can explain it scientifically now. There's, valid proof for mankind to look at, and it keeps growing because we keep uncovering different things.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, we have the Gnostics, all those hidden books that are now being, well, they've been revealed since the 70s, the Nag Hammadi library, we've talked about them, things that were hidden. And even though they've been around for a while, I think people have been resistant to some of this stuff, and maybe even some people who are listening might be resistant. The Course in Miracles workbook, it starts out by saying you may be resistant to some of this. You might even find it shocking, but just try it. Put it to the test. If we put these concepts to the test, it's about really doing something. Spending time in meditation, spending time in the willingness to rise, changing our concepts and our consciousness when we're upset with someone, and leaning more toward loving them. And if it means breathing harder and deeper and longer, well, then let's learn how to do that also, because it is our goal to rise higher. Love steadily, forgive readily.
Okay. I think when we started planning this podcast, we said we wanted people to help people understand through my interpretations of Joe's work and the Course of Miracles, of course, is to understand the power within them and their ability to be mystical, and how to possibly tap into that inner power. So I'm hoping that this podcast gives people, that people aren't resistant, but they just stop and be curious a little bit about it, because it's there, it's accessible.
Yeah,
we have to be willing, and we have to surrender.
We have to surrender and trust. We to trust. There's a very simple line in the Course in Miracles that says, trust would solve all problems now. And it's like, why? Because we're trusting.
Put that on something.
Yeah, well, it's the trust in the outcome, because we don't understand why this is happening right now. Whatever it is, whether it's something personal or political, whatever it is, we don't always, we can't understand. We can't understand, because when things are like beyond, instead of trying to figure it out, you know what they say, you don't run after the snake that bit you and ask it why it bit you.
I bet you, right, right.
You take care of yourself right then and there.
Exactly.
That's what we have to do. We have to take care of our emotional selves, but mostly our spiritual self is when we get to a place in trust. Trust would solve all problems now, because I can surrender, as you were saying. And there's a poem, I don't know if it's a poem, but I read something the other day I wanted to share with you. And I don't know who this person is, so I'm not quite sure how to say her name, but I think it's Yulie K, Ullie. And it's called The Ending. And this is what I think. I don't know that this is exactly what she's saying, but I'm interpreting it as saying, if we can trust the process, then we know that the ending will be as it should be. And as I will find peace, where I will find peace in that quantum field, even if it's not where my human ego self was expecting. So it says, I already know the ending. Good wins, peace prevails. The dragon is slayed and the sword is raised. But first, we must go through the part of the story where the plot has not yet twisted, the battle is not yet won, the storm is raging, the tower is locked, the apple is poisoned, the wolf is ready and waiting in the bed wearing grandmother's clothing. But I know the ending. I know the ending. And that's the mystic's way. That is the mystic's way. Just let it be, let it unfold. And I'll meet you in that quantum field.
Exactly. Like you said, trust.
Yes.
And it's not easy. We've said that. We understand.
That's why they call it practice, spiritual practice.
It's practice takes practice, a lot of practice. Listen,
Yeah.
I've lived a long time, still evolving, but I'm glad I'm on this path, and I'm glad I have you to talk about it.
Yeah. And we'll
Yeah.
continue to talk about it. Let's talk about it some more.
So, speaking of endings, I think this might be a good place to wrap it up for us. And
let's wrap it up.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Our faithful audience, that we have more to share with you.
Your fan club will make sure that you look at this. But yeah, I agree. It's time to wrap it up, and it's time to be grateful and thankful that we are on this path and that we know the ending. We know the ending. So before we end here, I just want to remind everybody that Thursday, March 13th, if you happen to be local and if you happen to see this or hear this before, we're going to be having a gathering on the beach under the full moon. And it's a magical full moon. Let's call it a mystical full moon. It's a full lunar eclipse and a partial solar eclipse. It's a blood moon, a worm moon, and I'll tell you all about it when we're together in person. So thanks again, everyone, for being here. Feel free to like, subscribe, share, ask questions. We're here for you. And guess what? Linda will be back. So thank you, Linda. We'll see you again. Bless you.